Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to another Monuments Monday. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the first Massachusetts Infantry Memorial. Now, in the last video we did, we highlighted the Smith's guns at Devil's Den, and in the comments we got questions about the erection of monuments on the battlefield. So I mentioned in the last video Park Knoll, who worked for a company that placed some of the monuments around the battlefield. And I got to thinking it would be kind of interesting if we talked about how they put up a monument. You know, these are some pretty heavy stones. And I imagine that other people at the time they were placing the monuments on the field were also interested in this. We do have some photographs of the construction of monuments, and my trusty binder here, I have some photographs that we're going to put on the screen here. We have several photographs of the construction of the Pennsylvania Monument, and you can see what a complicated process it was to lift these large, rather heavy stones into place. There's also an interesting photograph of the construction of the 121st Pennsylvania Monument on McPherson's Ridge on the first day's battlefield. And this photograph probably has its inception in the fact that the monument was late in going up, and when the unit came to dedicate the monument, it wasn't completed yet, so they had a group photograph taken in front of the monument, and you can see kind of the derrick that's been constructed to put the block and tackle on with the ropes and pulleys. Now, William Tipton, who was the battlefield photographer and took many monument dedication views, obviously was also interested in this. And so he took the opportunity in 1886 to record a series of views of the construction of the first Massachusetts Infantry Memorial. And here you can see in this image the monument stones being brought by a large wagon down the Emmitsburg Road towards this location. And we have a couple views here. In the second view, you can actually see the Rogers Orchard and the Rogers Barn in the background of this image. So it's taken not too far from us down the Emmitsburg Road. And on the side of the box on the wagon, you can actually read the Smith Granite Company from Westery, Rhode Island. And in other articles in 1886, it's obvious that a foreman of the laborers is a representative from the Smith Granite Company who probably traveled, I'm imagining, by train with the monuments that were being brought in and supervised the construction of the monument on the battlefield. Although I believe that they, for the most part, had a local construction crew helping them. And then we have this image which shows the monument on pulleys and being lowered into place. And I did a couple blow-ups here so you can see how expansive this is. And in the one where we're looking directly at the face of the monument on the right, that rope looks a little bit frayed to me. I don't know if I'd want to be standing under that stone when they're lifting it up by that pulley. But it's fascinating. These images are probably recorded in May of 1886. On May 4th, 1886, the Gettysburg Star and Sentinel has an article. Colonel Chandler and Captain Graff of the 1st Massachusetts Infantry visited the field last week and completed the arrangements for the erection of their handsome monument. They purchased a lot 80 feet front by 60 feet deep from Mr. S.J. Kadori on the Emmitsburg Road adjoining the Rogers property. Of course, that's Simon J. Kadori and Peter Rogers' property over here. The regiment was in the 1st Brigade, 2nd Division, 3rd Corps, and will erect one of the most beautiful and costly monuments on the field. And so that was May 4th. So sometime after that, the monument arrived, it was placed here, and it was dedicated on July 2nd, 1886. According to the newspaper article about the dedication ceremony, the 1st Massachusetts on Thursday morning at 11 a.m. erected one of the finest and most costly on the field. It stands on the Emmitsburg Road near the Rogers House. General Sickles and staff, General Crawford, General Carr, and other prominent officers were on the stand. Colonel C.Z. Baldwin, who commanded the regiment in the battle, gave an interesting resume of the fight on that part of the line. And of course, the 1st Massachusetts was part of General Daniel Sickles' 3rd Army Corps. And on the 2nd day, they moved from Cemetery Ridge out to the Emmitsburg Road, were attacked by the Confederates, and after heavy fighting, were driven back across these fields to Cemetery Ridge, where they came from. Now, we have photographs taken by William Tipton at the dedication ceremony of the survivors that were here at the battle, and there's 2 really nice images here we're showing of the dedication ceremony. It would be really nice to have the platform that was nearby to see where General Sickles was at this moment. But also, there's this 3rd photograph that was taken of the group at the ceremony. And there's this really neat article about it. An interesting incident on the occasion of the monument dedication was the presence of Mrs. Euphemia Miller, who came from her home in the West at the request of the committee. At the time of the battle, she was Euphemia Rogers, a buxom girl who bravely stood her ground when the rebel line swept over her father's place, ministering to a dozen wounded Union soldiers whom she got into the cellar of the house as the fire got hotter and hotter. She was introduced to the veterans of the 1st, who greeted her with 3 hearty cheers. And of course, this is Josephine Miller, who was 27 years old at the time of the battle. She was adopted by the Rogers. In one account, it's the Rogers' niece. In another account, it's their granddaughter. But basically, it was her adopted daughter. And during the fighting, she and Peter Rogers himself remained in the house. And during the heaviest of the fighting, she cared for wounded and kept the wounded safe. And remember, on July 3rd, we're at the location where General Pickett's division swung over the Emmitsburg Road. So Union artillery would be firing rounds, and rounds were passing through the house while she was with the wounded. Of course, the soldiers at the dedication ceremony remembered that she baked bread for them during the battle. And so, in what must have been a flash of creative excitement, they went into the house, which was actually being torn down at that time, and they ripped out the stove. And they put the stove over here next to the monument, and she baked bread for everyone. And William Tipton took a photograph of Josephine Miller baking bread for the soldiers. Now, it's interesting because she had married in 1863 to a guy named Slider. They had moved to Ohio. The veterans from Massachusetts actually paid the expenses for her and her family to come out to Gettysburg so she could be part of the dedication ceremony. Do you think it was important to the soldiers that she baked bread for them and cared for their wounded? I'm standing at the site of the Rogers house, and it was here where Peter Rogers and his family lived at the time of the battle. We're about a mile south of the town of Gettysburg along the Emmitsburg Road in the middle of the fields of Pickett's charge. So we don't have a good image of the original Rogers house. It was torn down in the 1880s, and two houses were built in its place at this location. Now, we do have a drawing by Charles Reed, who's with the 9th Massachusetts Battery, and we'll show that looking down the Emmitsburg Road. And you can kind of see the one-story log house that was here at that time. I guess it was fortunate for the veterans that the house was being torn down at that time, or they might not have gotten their loaf of bread that they so desired. Now, this same property, these two houses, stood here into, I think it was the 1940s, they were finally sold to the Gettysburg National Military Park and removed. But during the 1913 reunion, the Rogers farm again held center stage. According to a newspaper article, it has been planned by the survivors of General Joseph Carr's Brigade, 2nd Division, 3rd Army Corps, Army of the Potomac, to establish a camp on the old Rogers House property on the Emmitsburg Road near where the brigade fought, and have headquarters in one of the old houses on the estate. It is a part of the plan to have on the Rogers estate a large tent erected for meetings and campfires where the veterans and the veterans of the Confederate brigades known as Barksdales, Perrys, and Wilcoxes will be made welcome by their northern comrades. Isn't that nice? Now, in 1913, one of the people that attended the reunion was none other than Daniel Edgar Sickles, the commander of the 3rd Army Corps. And again, he lived to be 94 years old. So he's 93 in 1913. Sickles, we have a couple photographs of him here at the house that replaced the Rogers house. We're standing right near it, and this is the cap over the well where I believe there was a pump at the time in front of the house. And there's an image in the Library of Congress. It's called Cheering Sickles, that shows the veterans here cheering General Sickles. And for those of you who are battlefield aficionados, you might know that it was at this house where a reporter got into an argument with General Sickles about his embezzlement of funds in our battlefield, and it's where Sickles made that dramatic statement, "The whole damn battlefield is my monument." Now, one other thing that occurred at this reunion in 1913 for the 1st Massachusetts Infantry is our lesser visited battlefield of the week. So now we're out in front of the Emmitsburg Road, to the west of the Emmitsburg Road, I guess you'd say. And you can see in the background, there's a monument to Robert E. Lee, the Virginia Memorial. So we're like out in the fields where, you know, Pickett's division came across the field in that massive charge. At least they came across over here in this direction. But this marker is for the right of the 1st Massachusetts skirmish line. So after the early morning action between the Berdan sharpshooters and the 3rd Maine and Canamus Wilcox's brigade out near Pitzer's Woods, the 3rd Corps extended their skirmish line out in this direction. According to the marker, they occupied a skirmish line all the way from the Spangler Farm Lane out along this fence line in this direction. And then, of course, when the Southern Army attacked on July 2nd, the skirmish line fell back. But I think it's interesting that since they were here in 1913, they took this opportunity to put this marker up. And most people only see this marker if they are walking along this fence line in a Pickett's Charge recreation for the fighting on July 3rd. So although it's seen by a lot of groups, it's seldom visited in connection with the second day's battle. Now remember, if you like the content that we've been putting up on our YouTube channel, please hit the like and subscribe.